The World Health Organization proposes a treaty, or as they call it, an accord, or an instrument. They call it really anything but a treaty because a treaty would require all sorts of additional considerations from the United States Senate and other oversight in order to enter into it. And so they don't want to call it a treaty. They want to call it something else, really anything else, something like an accord, any other instrument. You can see this is the full document. We're going to go through it in detail to see what these people really want to do. Because if the Biden administration enters into this accord, if it's not a treaty, then maybe the Senate doesn't get to see it. They don't get to assent to it. They don't get to participate in the creation of it or the drafting of it or anything. Joe Biden could just unilaterally enter into it, and then the United States is bound to this thing. So the Republicans are unhappy about it. They're already issuing warning shots. They're debating this stuff in the UK as well. The Senate has a resolution entered into by senators like Cruz, Blackburn, Ernst, and others, putting a challenge on this. But before we dive into the actual document that is being drafted and circulated around the World Health Organization, let's see what the Republicans are saying about this and get some background over from Fox News. This was published on February 28th. They tell us that the GOP is firing warning shots at Biden over the deeply flawed treaty on the pandemic response. Of course, we're going to read this whole thing. But they did warn that they will oppose any attempt by Biden to adhere to an emerging, right? This is all pending. This is all fluid and dynamic. And this is what they're going to say. No, that was an old bill or that was an old draft and all this stuff is changing. They're saying that they're going to oppose any attempts by Biden to adhere to a treaty on how to respond to a second or future pandemic, unless the treaty wins Senate approval. You've got Jim Risch, Idaho. 14 other GOP senators introduced a resolution, which we will read later. They say that the negotiation process has gone too far over how much control China has over future pandemics. They say the World Health Organization has failed to hold China accountable. We got over 1 million Americans, thousands of Idahoans dead. And so for a United States, or for a sovereign nation to cede power to the WHO would be lunacy. Wouldn't it be lunacy? We certainly don't want to do that. All these agencies were supposed to, stop pandemics from happening. That's why they were funded. That's why we had all of these military projects to prepare for all of these things, NIAID and so on and so forth. And they didn't do such a good job with this one. And as we now know, there are a lot of conversations happening, even within the United States government, about whether they caused it in the first place by funding whatever they were doing at the Wuhan lab. So that's the warning from Republicans. And you can see, right, this is not something that has actually happened yet. I was today trying to dig up the Biden administration's position on this. I want to know, are they affirming they're going to sign this? Are they calling it a treaty? Are they calling it an accord? What is it? And what's their take on it? Or is this something that's going to just be sort of swept under the rug, kept under the radar, and we're going to wake up to a New York Times article about this saying, oh yeah, guess what we're a part of now? Some new bilateral agreement between the United States and whatever, right? Ridiculous. So this is the actual document. Let's go through it. You can see it is a draft, zero draft of the WHO CA Plus for the consideration of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body at its fourth meeting. Now, as you'll see here in this title, it says World Health Organization Convention. They call it, could be a convention. It could be an agreement. It could be that either. Or it could be other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. All right, so basically what you're seeing here is a bunch of people straining to find any other possible word other than the word treaty. And they definitely don't want to say that. Okay, even though it's sort of kind of like a treaty a little bit, you know what I mean? It's kind of like binding you to do all this stuff, and we're all going to, agree that this is how we're going to run the next pandemic whenever that is released, or whatever, whatever lab accident causes that one. We'll have to wait and see. But this was drafted as a draft on February 1st, 2023, so it's hot off the presses, at the fourth meeting of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Body. Vomit. How many bureaucrats can you cram into one organization? It's basically this. It's like the density of a black hole of bureaucrats. All right, so here's what they're telling us. Background, methodology, and approach. These are our leaders speaking, the people who control what we do and where we live and how we act and all the things. Here they say, in recognition of the catastrophic failure, that's an understatement, of the international community in showing solidarity. Oh, here we go. I thought they were going to say catastrophic failure in their performance to do their jobs, right? That's why we have like a health organization. They didn't do so good helping people get healthy, in my humble opinion. So in recognition of the catastrophic failure of the international community in showing solidarity and equity, in response to COVID, the World Health Organization has convened a second special session. That took place December 2021, where it established this negotiating body, which is the body that, a bunch of the bureaucrats got together in this case, to draft and negotiate a convention, an agreement, or another instrument, except a treaty, definitely not a treaty, for preparedness for the next pandemic. Isn't that nice? So they're very upset that not really about the results or the deaths or the fact that maybe this came from a lab in China. None of that is really relevant. It's the fact that there was not solidarity. There were a bunch of people who were opposing lockdowns and opposing mandates and saying, to hell with your totalitarian insanity. We stand by our liberty and freedom. There were people protesting. There were people speaking out, being canceled. There were people dying for this stuff all over the world. So this is, okay, that's what their methodology is. Solidarity and equity. So apparently the response was also inequitable. All right. In furtherance of the above mandate, they say that the INB established a process and a systematic approach for its work. And at its second meeting, they said that the instrument should be legally binding and contain both legally as well as non-legally binding elements. So whatever this is, okay, whatever you're going to see, if you search for this stuff all over the internet, you'll say, if you type in, is Biden declaring the United States sovereignty property of the World Health Organization? Is Biden abdicating U.S. sovereignty? Type something like that in with the World Health Organization treaty. You're going to get fact checks out the wazoo. You've got a bunch of copy pasters, journos out there who are fact checking from the USA Today. No. He's not giving up any sovereignty at all. This is just sort of like a guidebook, like a nice manual. That is just like recommendations, but you don't have to do it that way. All right, well, here you go. So it says that the instrument, they said this in their meeting, first meeting, they said at the second meeting, that it should be legally binding. Obviously, what's the point of this if it's not? And this is the same argument that they tried with the mandates in the first place, right? They told us that you have to do this or else it doesn't work, right? The only mechanism that supported the methodology, right? The only way we could reach, quote, herd immunity or whatever is if we all did the thing. And so if you have one person who is an aberration, you have one person who says, we're not going to do that. That person gets canceled. They get fired. They get ridiculed, harassed, suspended, deplatformed. They lose their livelihood, maybe lose custody of their kids. They get locked in different residences in China or Australia. Like, it's nuts. So it's the same thing. If you have one oddball out, that's a murder. That's a grandma killer, that person. How many times do we get called that here? And so in this situation, same thing for the country. You're going to just let a country just sort of do its own thing? Get out of here. That's not how communists work. Everybody's got to do the same thing. If we're all going to be miserable under their reign. I mean, if some of us have to be miserable under their reign, we're all going to be miserable under their reign. So they say in that regard, and to make this legally binding, with some things that are not legally binding, they say in that regard, we've identified the World Health Organization Constitution as the comprehensive provision under which the instrument should be adopted. So Article 19 specifically. This is where they're saying we get our power to do this, without prejudice to also considering, as work progressed, another provision under Article 21. At its third meeting, as these bureaucrats met, with the support of the World Health Organization Secretariat, the INB further agreed that the zero draft would be considered at its fourth meeting and understood that the draft will be just a draft. Okay, so we've got all of that. Thank you for the summation there. Now, as we move forward, we see this is the contents of this proposed accord instrument, but definitely not a treaty. This thing is 32 pages, and let's see what it contains for us. We have introduction, we have guiding principles and scope. We'll probably want to see that. Here in chapter 3, which is a whole chapter, we have a whole chapter on this. Achieving equity. There you go. That word is right there, front and center, where you'd expect it to be. Basically, it's the first real topic, right? It's basically it is the first real topic. Chapter 1 is an intro. We define the terms. Chapter 2 is sort of big vision, right? What you'd expect, like an orientation chapter, the objective, guiding principles, and so on. The first thing they're talking about is achieving equity in preparedness, response, and recovery of health systems. You see that? Let's see what else is like. What comes after equity? What's more important than what's less important than equity? Strengthening capacities for prevention comes after that, right? Equity is first, then preventing is second, which, is sort of counterintuitive to me. I think that you really don't have to have an equitable response if you just prevent it in the first place. But what the hell do I know? Coordination and cooperation for health system recovery also comes after that. And the financing of pandemic prevention. So money, right? Money comes here later on. We've got institutional arrangements. The bureaucrats want to figure out who's in charge. Who's the governing body? Oh, who's the consulting body? What's the oversight mechanism, right? Who's in charge of all of this? So bureaucrat sort of, they love to write that stuff. Here are the final provisions: signature, ratification, entry into force, settlement of disputes, right to vote, and the final provision. So this is what they're, working on. This is what they're concocting, trying to draft up for us. So here is what they are. We're going to fast forward through all of this, right? This is sort of that language that they use to sort of say, like, make them feel good about themselves. They're like, okay, why are we doing this, everybody? You're doing a great job reaffirming the principle of sovereignty of state parties. Okay, so they're not absolutely, doing that. So they write here in the first paragraph about reaffirming the principle of sovereignty of the state parties. It's the first thing. The rest of the document is going to be about how we are taking away the sovereignty of the state parties, which is why they put that first. It'd almost be like if our U.S. Constitution said we guarantee the right to free speech, and then everything else was talking about, the limitations to free speech, more or less, right? So reaffirming the principle of sovereignty of the states as we onboard you onto a global World Health Organization platform. You see how insane that is? So they're not reaffirming anything, all right, as far as we can tell. Now, we haven't read the document, so maybe I could be wrong. This could be a document about individual government autonomy, but let's see. Don't hold your breath. So as we fast forward through this, we get through all of their very, pompous language, and here they agree as follows. The world together equitably. Our vision. The WHO aims for a world where pandemics are effectively controlled to protect present and future generations from pandemics and their devastating consequences, and to advance the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health for all peoples on the basis of equity, human rights, and solidarity, with the view of achieving universal health coverage while recognizing the sovereign rights of countries, acknowledging the differences and levels of development among countries, respecting their national context, and recognizing the relevant international instruments. Not treaties, though. Man, that was a run-on sentence if I've ever seen one. Holy moly. They're cramming a lot of stuff into that. The World Health aims to achieve greater equity and effectiveness at prevention of pandemics through fullest national and international cooperation, which means you better get on board or else. So I'm all in favor of preventing pandemics. I don't want to live through what we lived through again. It hit our family pretty hard. My brother Joey, who some of you have seen here, known and loved, was in the hospital for 48 days. I'm not happy about that, right? I want competent oversight, competent leadership. I don't believe that the World Health Organization, which was in charge of the last one, which was preparing, this was their entire job, should be granted additional powers after they failed pretty catastrophically in the last one, in my humble opinion. They are now going to be demanding more levers of power, and they have the ego and the sort of God complex that they can control this stuff. They tried to, theoretically, they tried to control this one in a lab in Wuhan. That didn't work out. So if you are trying to effectively control it, your track record is not good on this thus far. And all of the transparency, all of the acknowledgement of national sovereignty all went out the window when the world went into panic mode. So we have some definitions, which we'll fast forward through because those are quite boring. They say that the implementation of this shall be guided by the Charter of the United Nations. So they'll sort of tuck this under the UN guidelines. We have the objective of this entity. 1, the objective of the World Health Organization, here it is again, guided by equity. In fact, let's just do a control find on this. Can we see how many times this word is in here? Let's see. Let's just see what we got here while we're here. Equity. Okay, 10 times in, what is it, 32 pages? All right, so we'll go back up. Yeah, there it is. 10 times in 30 pages. Actually, less than I thought it would be. But here we have, the objective is as guided by equity. The vision, principles, and the rights is to prevent pandemics and to save lives. All good. We can agree with that. The question is, 1, can you prevent pandemics? And 2, how do you do it? What do you have to give up in order to do this? Fauci said China's totalitarian dictatorship gave him a lot of tools to do that. Is it worth sacrificing your liberty and your freedom and your God-given rights to go do and live your life as you choose? To survive a pandemic, to give all of that up, to be locked in a house with nothing because some bureaucrat said so? Give me a break. All right, so here are their guiding principles. 1, they say respect for human rights unless you oppose their mandates, at which point you become vermin who should be fired, thrown off planes, separated from your kids. Your human rights go into the trash if you don't take the jab, as we have talked about at length here. The right to health, again, the highest enjoyment of the, okay, again, unless you disagree with their version of what health is. And there really was no right to health. They locked the gyms down. They said, stay in your house, eat garbage food, drink tons of alcohol, do tons of drugs, and just sit there and shut up while you binge watch Netflix for 2 years. Shove your kids in front of the Zoom classroom meetings. What right to health? They were closing down parks. They were closing down hiking trails. All right. Sovereignty. States have, in accordance with the Charter of UN Nations, the sovereign right to determine and manage their approach. Sovereignty also covers the rights of states over their biological resources. And it's nice they put that in there. We know how that works out in practice. Equity. The absence of unfair is point number 4. The absence of unfair, avoidable, or remedial differences, including in their capacities. Any inequality. They say effective pandemic prevention and preparedness cannot be achieved without political will and commitments in addressing the structural challenges to inequitable access to fair, equitable, and safe pandemic projects. That's why they're going to tackle the inequities. They've got solidarity. They've got transparency, which they've not been transparent at all. We are now in 2023. We still don't know where this thing came from, right? I think we do know where it came from, but they won't acknowledge it with any certainty for us. Accountability, same topic there. Fauci's still running around. They also want inclusiveness so that all the relevant stakeholders are involved. They want community engagement and gender equality. Yeah, pandemic prevention comes about if men and women have gender equality. We'll all live longer. The COVID won't kill you as quickly if you have equal COVID. Yeah, equal COVID amongst the genders, yeah. Non-discrimination and respect for diversity, the rights of individuals in vulnerable positions, universal health care coverage is also something they're striving for. They want science and evidence-informed decisions. Somebody should tell that to Fauci. Central role, of the World Health Organization. So they're going to give themselves some nice little power there. As the directing and coordinating authority on global health and the leader of multilateral cooperation, the World Health Organization is fundamental to strengthening pandemic prevention, preparedness, and the recovery of health systems. So they're going to give themselves a big fat raise courtesy of all of us, essentially. Now, it's just amazing. So here it is again, chapter 3. The first big bullet point that we got to get into is the achieving equity for the health systems. They want that all the parties, so all the different nations, to create standards and adhere to them, to map sources, develop mechanisms to ensure equitable allocation of different things. Parties commit to safeguard the humanitarian principles, access to technology, regulatory strengthening, developing research capacities. And then this is the benefit sharing system. So let's see what this is about. Because one of the biggest issues of this last pandemic was that we didn't really know what the heck was going on. Do you remember that? Remember how frustrating that was in the early era of the pandemic? We didn't know what the death rate was. We didn't know if people were dropping dead at 2% or 0.2% or 0.02%. We didn't know if this was, 15%, where it came from, what it was doing. There were, ventilator debates. There were all sorts of debates about, supplements and all sorts of things, obviously, that we covered a lot here and got strikes on YouTube for talking about. So here we have, the informational supply chains were massively broken. So here, what are they going to be doing? Well, they say the need for a multilateral, fair, equitable, timely systems would be useful. The PABS system would share data across entities. And of course, it needs to be fair and equitable benefit sharing, which is just, okay. So, all right. So this is just the document. You can see it's essentially a big bureaucratic gobble up of power. The best analogy that I can think of is this is the Medical Patriot Act for a centralized global governance body, which is a little bit different than sort of our own, Department of Homeland Security and our own, domestic security state that got built up in the aftermath of 9/11. This is the same thing, just on a global scale. So this is the governing body. They say it's going to be composed of a conference of the parties. So this will be the new bureaucratic entity that's in charge. Sort of like the UN, you go and speak in front of the UN. This would be the same thing. So a governing body would be the supreme organ of this. The COP would be the supreme governing body. It would be composed of delegates representing the different countries. So the United States would have a delegate. And then they would make decisions and try to reach a consensus. Basically vote on these things. 2 presidents, 4 vice presidents, and others. And there's rules for oversight and protocols. I was looking for withdrawal, amendments, the right to vote, withdrawal. At any time, so like if Biden entered into this, what could the United States leave this? How does this work? At any time after 2 years from the date on which the World Health Organization has entered into force for a party, may withdraw by giving written notification. It'll take effect 1 year. Any party shall not be considered if they withdraw. All right. So, all right, the rest of this is pretty bland and, little bit uninteresting, other than the fact that they are now demanding authority to sort of do all of that stuff. And so the question is, what is this going to look like when it gets entered into effect? We don't really know yet. That was only a draft. But we do know that the Republicans are preparing to push back on this. So there was an interesting filing from the Republicans, and this was signed off on by a number of GOP senators, including, let's see who's on this list. We've got Cassidy, Rich. Actually, this was the summation. Bill Cassidy posted this March 1st. He says, U.S. senators and 13 other colleagues have introduced a resolution that will ensure the president does not cede U.S. sovereignty to the WHO. They say the World Health Organization is the decision-making body of the WHO, following a decision by the WHA during its special session. They're expected to deliver a final agreement by May 2024. All right, so that'll be here before you know it, right in the middle of an election year. So, okay, all those Republicans who signed off on this thing, they formed this resolution relating to this new treaty. They say Clause 2, Section 2, Article 2 of the Constitution says that a president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, can make treaties if 2/3 of the senators agree, right? Here, the requirement remains unfulfilled. If he enters into an agreement about international pandemic prevention without the advice of the consent of the Senate, that would be an unfulfilled obligation under the Constitution. They say the Senate has the power to give advice and consent and may refuse. Article 5, Clause 2 of Section 5, Article 1, about what the president can do to enter into treaties. And so here they say, by exercising the rulemaking authority that we hold in the Senate, the Senate is essentially declaring that if there is an agreement entered into, any agreement described in the prior subsection, if it does involve significant political and economic commitment, they say it does not legally bind the United States, right? They're saying Biden, basically anything he enters into, he has to send it over to the Senate. If he doesn't send it over to the Senate, then it's not legally binding, and of course, all that stuff would be debated in a court of law. And, there would be lawsuits out the wazoo. In other words, if Biden entered into an agreement or an accord or whatever he's entering into, and then he would be sued by that. He would be sued, I'm sure, and then we'd have to hash that stuff out in court. But going to be very interesting to see what he does and what the final agreement looks like. Fortunately, we have some time. But they are starting to debate this stuff. In fact, our friends in the UK are talking about this on their parliament floor.
Andrew Blinchen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When they've finished. The World Health Organization pandemic treaty is deeply concerning. It seeks to give the discredited WHO huge powers over this country and our people. Powers to call pandemics, enforce lockdowns, enforce vaccinations, and decide when any pandemic is over. Can we have an urgent debate on the proposed treaty, which, if passed, will take accountability, democracy and sovereignty from our constituents and hand it over to unelected and discredited bureaucrats? Mr. Speaker, that will be the antithesis of Brexit itself.
Leader.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and I think that it's an excellent topic for a debate. I shall certainly make his views known to both the Department for Health and the FCDO that will look after many of these international organisations. But I can tell him it is incredibly important. We know from the pandemic, and we know from other outbreaks such as Ebola, that these diseases know no borders, and it is only through international cooperation and collaboration together that we will arrive at the solutions to ensure we do not have a repeat of the last few years, and that we can ensure everyone in the world is safe from these terrible diseases.
Yeah, we want everybody to be safe and free from COVID and all of the other terrible diseases. We'd also like to know how this one came about and why it came about, to make sure that it doesn't come about again, because if humanity was involved in it, shouldn't we make sure that humanity doesn't get involved in it again? So we'll see. World Health Organization is going to do a lot of colluding, I'm sure, amongst themselves to figure out how best to help again in the next pandemic, since they did such a great job last time. We'll continue to cover it. Thanks for liking this video. Thanks for subscribing, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. We would all like to lose those leftover pandemic pounds, but how sick are you of all the ads for weight loss pills and fad diets and all that stuff? We've all already been there. We've all already done that. And we know they don't work. But you know what does? Eating 5 healthy servings of fruits and vegetables every day. You do that and the weight probably just starts to fall right off. But vegetables, not a fan. And who's got time to prepare all of that every day? Instead, let's talk about Field of Greens. Now, Field of Greens is a science-backed formula of specific fruits and vegetables that you won't find in any other product. Proper nutrition reboots your metabolism so you burn calories the faster way and lose weight healthier. And Field of Greens is the only brand backed by a better health promise. Yes, you're going to look healthier and feel healthier, but the greater proof is going to come at your next checkup when your doctor says, wow, you've lost weight. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. All right, so let's get you started. Go on over to fieldofgreens.com. Get your real organic superfood. Enter code Robert to save 15% off at checkout. It tastes good. It's delicious. You're going to feel great. The vegetables want to be eaten. You're going to be bursting with green energy, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So go check them out, fieldofgreens.com, and don't forget to use code Robert at checkout so you can save your 15%.